I'm going to kind of continue on a lot of what Pat was talking about, specifically in fair housing, and that's what this little short 10-minute session is. If you've ever been to a fair housing session, it's usually a 3-hour session. You've got 10 minutes, so listen quickly and intently here. Specifically regarding smoking in housing. It is unlawful to discriminate based on these 6 factors: race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, handicap. What is missing from that? Oops, wrong way. Smoking. Smokers are not a protected class. Pat alluded to that. You can discriminate against someone from smoking inside a unit. And as she's saying, I think the preferred message is smoking, not smokers. Again, we're not trying to get people to quit, although it would be nice if they did, but they just cannot smoke inside a unit. Smoking is not a right. Pat alluded to that. There is no fundamental right for someone to smoke. It's not there. It's not under fair housing. So people have been challenged in court about smoking in housing. It's not a fair housing issue. Whoops, I keep going the wrong way. One of the things I just want to really emphasize, though, and specific to fair housing, is if or when you implement a smoke-free housing rule, that you have a policy. Make sure you have a policy. It is very important when fair housing investigators come up, they want to look at a policy to see what the policy is. In that policy, have a lease addendum. Have your policy there. If you are going smoke-free, set a date. Don't do, as Pat had said, hey, you've got 1 day to quit. Set it out. Make sure that you inform residents, inform tenants. We all like to be informed of what's going on in our world, especially in our housing world. If you're going to implement a new policy, a new addendum to a lease, make sure that you inform those tenants, inform those residents. We all like to be, but set a date, inform signage, enforcement. In your policy, I highly encourage, and Pat alluded to that, have some type of a step. If it is a lease violation, if you're going to go, okay, we're going to implement this smoke-free policy, and if you have somebody who's smoking, if you give them a verbal warning, a written warning, a lease violation, eviction, whatever that is, have it in writing in your policies. I want to talk about reasonable, reasonable accommodations. Pat alluded to that a little bit. A reasonable accommodation is right up there. I don't have to read it to you. It is something that makes housing accessible for everybody, irregardless of their disability. Now, if you implement a smoke-free policy, or if you have one already implemented, and someone comes up to you and asks for a reasonable accommodation to smoke in their unit, do not, I repeat, do not ignore it. That can get you into trouble. They may be a person with a disability, and they're making a reasonable accommodation. It is not reasonable for them to smoke in their unit. However, as Pat was saying, if they are a person with a disability, for instance, a mobility impairment, and it's difficult for them to get out of their unit, as Pat was saying, maybe you move them closer to the elevator. Maybe you move them closer to a door so that they can get out of their unit easier to do that. Do not ignore a reasonable accommodation, regardless if it seems really frivolous. That will get you into trouble with fair housing, because they can call, and what they might be reporting to fair housing is they refused a reasonable accommodation. I'm a person with a disability, and then you have fair housing folks come in. Now, it may come to your favor, but as some of you have probably had some fair housing questions, or fair housing investigators come, they're going to look at everything. They're going to look at your policies. Back to that. Make sure that you have some policies in that. Again, do not, I have to emphasize that, because it might seem frivolous. No, you can't smoke in your unit. We've set something up. You can smoke elsewhere outside the building. The other thing is, if you do have a designated smoking area outside of your building, make sure that that access is accessible to individuals with disabilities. You say, you can smoke out there next to that tree, and you have to go through a snowbank, or you have to go through grass or something else. That may get you into some issues with fair housing, because you do not have an accessible route to there. That was really it, my short and sweet point on fair housing and smoking. Again, smokers are not a protected class, and you can discriminate against them and smoking inside the unit. Just make sure that you follow your policies. That's the whole and key things. Follow your policies.